Greetings, dear viewers. Today we are going to be doing some pseudo-literary analysis on doujins. More specifically, Remielle doujins. Now, I'm not going to lie, there's not a lot of them so far. Or at least, not a lot of higher quality ones, like my Elise doujin reviews. So what we are going to do here is review multiple of them instead. Now if I'm timing this correctly, this video should be uploaded right before her banner, so feel free to use this as a catalyst. Anyways, without further ado, the first doujin up on the list is Now I'm not going to lie, I have no idea who this is from. Hitomi didn't credit any source for this, so if anybody knows, feel free to drop it in the comments down below. This doujin is relatively short, and by relatively short, I mean effectively just one page. The story starts with Wise and Remy watching a movie together, unknowingly watching an Arrow movie in actuality. Remy then comments on her misremembering what the movie was actually about, as Wise seems flustered by her sight. The both of them then hold hands together, heated with tense energy as they awkwardly exit the theater. Also, the movie clerk comments on her seeing Wise again with another girl, as you do. A couple hours later, we see the results of the previous heated tension, with Wise going ham on Remy, doing the plap 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 get pregnant thing, as Remy questions the chain of events leading up to this moment. Now, the overall plot is relatively simple, as expected of a one-page doujin, and the character work for both our main characters here could use some fine-tuning. But with that being said, however, it does do a good job in fleshing out the atmosphere and the tension leading up to the eventual payoff. Despite its length, it manages to add context into an otherwise one-note story, which I appreciate. If I were to rate this doujin, it would go into B tier, with my only complaint being its abysmal story length. Thankfully, this next doujin does not have the issue of length, but it isn't really a solo-focused Remielle doujin. By the way, kudos to my Japanese friend who translated these last two doujins. Shout out to him. The doujin starts with Remy, Sisia, and Promia checking up on Wise after what is assumedly a battle, where he either got too exposed to ether or overused Pirois. Remy comments that the ether is concentrated on his Armstrong jet cannon, and wonders if it's been pent up before taking him to a safe zone to demonstrate to the other two how to deal with this situation. Sisia asks if all this is legit, as Remy inserts herself inside him. But Remy assures her through demonstrating that this action is in fact gradually calming down the ether pent inside of Wise. Promia comments how formidable his Armstrong jet cannon is and wants to be the one next after Remy, who agrees, but only after the first takeoff of Wise Armstrong jet cannon. Wise then slowly wakes up to Remy bouncing on it, not really complaining but mostly surprised, even commenting on how good the experience is. Remy slips out the word sex instead of treatment for the action, and Wise comments on how ironic it is for a first-generation Void Hunter to be saying and doing this. But he doesn't at all care, as the feeling is too good to hold back on, to the point of him taking a more proactive approach. Remy calls him a bit too naughty, and never said that he was allowed to get her pregnant. But alas, Wise can't really hold back at this point due to the feeling. After the first takeoff of Wise's Armstrong jet cannon, it is now Promia's turn. though she is apprehensive still, as confirmed by Sissia, when she asks if she had experience, to which Promia answered no. Wise then speaks up and compliments her cute kiyat, which she always hides, and emphasizes how good this feature is on Promia. She gets flustered once more and internally thinks that Wise's Armstrong jet cannon is even more formidable than expected. Wise takes note of Promia's inexperience and teases her on her first time, with Promia being flustered on being called cute so often. The teasing then causes her to tighten up, and despite wanting to go longer, Wise can't help but be squeezed dry. Wise again comments on Promia being sexy and kind before the second round of the Armstrong jet cannon takes off. Time for snack. Sissia exclaims that she was pretty worried about Wise and his state earlier, and says she'll do her best to squeeze out the ether from him. Wise then comforts her and gives her a French kiss, which she apparently really likes, and that makes Sissia feel all light and fluffy, before claiming that she'll heal his Armstrong jet cannon with her quote-unquote intense piston. Wise thanks her and suggests that since it's a piston, he can help out by matching her rhythm. Sissia says that if Wise moves his Armstrong jet cannon simultaneously, it will go further beyond inside. The next page shows a three-way domain clash between them, as he goes for another round on each one. Wise comments on Remy that her Armstrong jet cannon docking port feels really good and that he could do this over and over, before following up with a plap 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 meme. For Promia, she accepts being pregnant as Wise takes her up on that offer. She also wants to kiss while doing so, which is cute. On our freeloading snack, Wise states that she is already part of their family, so that means she can start a new family with him, as Sissia happily agrees. In the end, all three of them had Wise's Armstrong jet cannon docked multiple times, with Promia and Remy commenting if this is enough to ease the ether or not. With a final comment from Sissia guessing that Wise's ether was already stable, and they were just doing the deed for the love of the game. End scene. So that was a comparatively longer one for sure, and I have to say it gets points for good character work, as with the characterization for all of them is pretty good, with slight exceptions for Wise, but I can let that slide in this context. Though the setup is comparatively weaker than the first one, this does introduce a plot point for the story that needed to be resolved through a justifiable action. So even with the weaker tension and payoff, it makes as much sense in a story perspective. Not a Remielle focused doujin, but it makes it clear that she's the main one here. If I were to rate this one with my criteria, it would be a B+. Overall solid, but not perfect. Perfectly enjoyable for a good time. Since Remy could have both Wise and Belle as her dance partner, let's switch things up for the final one, as it's a Belle and Remy focused doujin. Now for this one, I have to add a bit of context with the artist in question, as they've been doing somewhat of a doujin series, with Futa Belle going through the Zenless roster, and now it's Remy's turn on this. The reason why I bring up this added context is because the doujin starts off immediately, with no pretense whatsoever, with Belle saying that she likes Remy, and they should get married, so they could unload her Armstrong jet cannon every day, forever. Remy agrees and asks to get pregnant as Belle's Armstrong jet cannon launches. She compliments Remy's feel and says she will add her to her collection before letting out an Orayo, which is pretty funny, not gonna lie. It ends with Belle complimenting Remy's services in cleaning Belle's Armstrong cannon with her mouth, before commenting on Remy's lewdness as she's primed for another takeoff with her Armstrong jet cannon. Now then, despite it being 2 pages longer than the first doujin here, there is less to talk about, as there is no setup nor tension for the payoff. Just simply the climax without a rising action. The character work is subpar for Belle, but not too daunting for Remy, so I'll give it that. All in all, while the art I would say is the best here compared to the others, there is not much going on with it other than that. Which is why I would rate it just a C+. Not the worst thing in the world, but other than just fuel to the fire of one's desire, there is not that much to take note of here. Which I guess is why the author has so many of these, similar to what Anchorman is doing. In any case, that would be all for the Remy doujins. I know there are some that might count but are not officially labeled as such, so I don't include them. Frankly, I'm surprised there's not more, or at least more lengthy ones. But I guess she hasn't been in the spotlight long enough, so we'll see. And maybe I'll do a part 2 of this when the time comes. Anyways, good luck on your Remy pulls later, and remember to max her out. Jane!